Hello everyone and welcome to today's IEP Live Learn Lunch. We're really thrilled today to be joined by Louise from Mesmer, who is going to take us through an introduction to business improvement techniques. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Louise. Please do in the meantime though, use the chat and make sure you're asking any questions in the chat or sharing your thoughts throughout the session, because I know that helps Louise with her session and she'll want to know what you're all thinking. So over to you, Louise.
I do like to know what people are thinking at all times. Thank you very much, Helen. Hello, everyone. It's good to be here. I think I'll kind of aim for, I don't know, what do we try and do? About 40 minutes max input from me. And then that either buys you some time back, or if you've got any questions, then I'm always really happy to take them as we go through. I'm just going to move Helen's screen out the way and just put mine on. I will assume you can see that unless someone yells at me to tell me that they can't.
Yeah, we can see that. That's fine.
Thank you, Helen. That's great. So today's session, as we've said, is around using business improvement techniques to successfully make everyday changes. And I'll share the aims with you in a moment, but I think what's probably worth saying is the reason why we run this session, the reason why we thought it was particularly relevant to IEP members is quite often when someone pushes the "we need to do quality improvement" button, then it can feel a little bit grandiose in the way that that's positioned. You know, we need to introduce black belt Six Sigma people, we need to, you know, have armies of people who are focused on Kaizen, and there's nothing wrong with that on any level, but actually that the result is sometimes that can feel a little bit remote from the people who are doing the job every day. So one of the things that I have tried to do throughout my career and still do with some of our clients is around saying, well, let's know that all of those big important things and clever things are happening, but actually how do we drive that mentality of whatever my job is, I can have a role in improving the way that we do things around here. And fundamentally that's what business improvement techniques is about. So today is just about giving you a little bit of rich pickings around that. So why I tell you all of that is because I'm introducing some really practical ideas and tools. I hope that you will find them simple enough that you don't have to overthink them tomorrow when you think, I wonder what that was that Louise mentioned. So yes, it's great that you can come back and look at the webinar, but equally I would just like some of it to kind of stick in your head so you think, okay, I can take that forward and I can do something with that. So introduce some practical ideas and tools that will help you to find and reduce waste within your organization. So that word waste in this context is a really, really important one, because you'll see that I keep coming back to it in some of the things that I share with you, in that sense of, you know, what does waste look like in our organization? How do we go about finding it? And when we found it, what is it that we can do something about with it? So I'll touch on all of those bits of that as we go through today. I've kind of got 4 broad areas to cover. I'll probably duck in and out as I usually do for all of them at different times, but I thought maybe just a comment on the current context would be helpful, and why we thought between us and IEP you might want to see something about this now. That piece about thinking about how you find waste, because there's some really nice simple techniques in knowing how to do that. Then about the techniques to make the change itself happen, because actually we often talk about problem solving and innovation, but there's a process to that, and that's what I hope that I can share some simple ideas with you, and then some examples of using those techniques in practice. And I'll tell you a bit later about who these examples are from. And then if you've got any questions, you know, feel free to ask. No question is a daft question, and it might be you saying, well, I can see that, but I'm not sure how I would do that in my context, so tell me. So feel free to ask that stuff along the way as well, or just drop it in the chat as and when you think about it. So Let's talk very briefly about the current context. And I think you guys are in an interesting space, and I know some of you who are on today navigate the landscape that we also navigate at Mesmer. So if you haven't met us, we're quality assurance specialists. You may well know us because you may use our software platform that helps you to manage quality assurance improvement, or you might know us because we do lots of stuff consultancy-wise around it as well. So we also cross over between education and employment support, and some of you will cross over into even more sectors than that. But I think this slide probably applies to both, and you may want to put other things on here as well. So my interpretation of the current context in which we're operating is that at the top, we have a complex and changing compliance landscape, because there always is, and that's not COVID related. Lots of time at the moment we obviously talk in context about COVID or emerging from COVID, but actually the very nature of our sectors, because they are so heavily regulated, means that we are navigating sometimes conflicting, complex and changing compliance requirements that cross over between the different sectors. Down on the right hand side, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling this one at the moment, and I'm hearing lots of conversations in this space around survival and sometimes growth. For not everyone, growth is an ambition, but survival and growth of the fittest. How do we make sure that we are in the best place possible to be successful? And over there on the left-hand side, and certainly for you guys who are very much in the headspace today because of who we're delivering the webinar with, are in the employment support headspace, then there is an increased scrutiny from the funders around the quality of service. And I'm sure that you will agree that that's no bad thing, but it's thinking about what does that mean for us. Some of you who are wearing that other hat in education, I'm not sure increased is there, but there is always a scrutiny around that quality because of the nature of the difference in the regulation. So that's what we've got going on. And what that does is it creates for me always some tensions and opportunities. I'm a change management person at heart. So I'm always really fascinated about how people are either the enabler or the barrier to change happening in an organization, and sometimes on the same day, kind of half an hour between each other, we can be both. Even me in the morning, or morning and afternoon, I might behave differently about whether or not I see something as a tension or an opportunity. But I think it's seeing those, being mindful of the tensions, but also seeing the opportunities that context creates for us, saying, okay, so how might we use business improvement techniques to navigate this context as successfully as we possibly can. So therefore, the relevance to today's topic, I kind of distilled into these areas. There are inefficiencies in the way we work, which we can reduce or remove. I can't think of a better statement of fact about any organization. There are, in fact, I might even say always into that sentence, there are always inefficiencies in the way that we work, which we can reduce and improve. And reduce or remove. And those inefficiencies can be as simple as, if you guys look around your workspace at the moment, so look at your desk or look at wherever you're sitting, that inefficiency might exist in the fact that I've got a huge pile of paper over here that's getting in my way, or it might be that I haven't quite got my laptop where I want it to be today. So that's resulting in me being inefficient in the way I work. It's really down to that level. Or it might be looking at a more macro level at the way that we have inefficiencies in process. But I think it's just a wonderful statement of fact to start with, that we're not even asking the question, are there inefficiencies? There are, because there always are. And there are always ways that we can strip out waste. The second one is that quality can result from fixing the stuff that gets on yours or your employees or your customers or your employers. So the employers you work with who are recipients of your customers as jobs or recipients of your education provision, of course, and it just gets on your nerves. So when we're looking at quality improvement, sometimes it's not about innovation in the sense of how do we do something fundamentally different. It's noticing And noticing is a really big thing in identifying waste. How can we notice the stuff that's getting right on your goat and not just accepting it as just that's the way it is, you know? And again, some really practical examples. So if you think about, maybe if you're in the office or even at home, you think about the printer. So, you know, you've got a shared printer in an office, and the printer has all of those bits of paper that come out when you change your toner cartridge. You know, how many printers do you ever see that have still got that pile of paper sitting next to it or on top of it or around it, because it's no one's job to move it? Another example I see often, you can tell so much when you look at it, the state of the kitchen sink within an office. It doesn't matter how many laminates someone puts up saying wash your own dishes, there'll still be loads of teaspoons in the sink in some places. So that's the stuff that gets on our nerves, and it's thinking about the impact that then has on the quality of service we deliver. The third one, it puts us in control of our future rather than rely on external environmental changes. So I talked to you about the external context on the last slide, and what this does is actually say, well, even for all of those things that are going on outside of, for me, and I think that is very relevant to where lots of us are at the moment, about navigating a really difficult, you know, personal and professional landscape, how can I take some of the control back around that? And actually there's something in there about confidence and well-being. You know, it comes into this whole mix. And the last one about, you know, the big one for me is always about building a culture of quality improvement. Yes, today I'm showing you some processes about how you can make it easy, but actually I'm also really interested in how that just permeates through the organization, so that we have a culture of just always wanting things to be better and constantly being curious about how we can make them better as well. So let's have a look at, you know, that finding waste in everyday work. So and I gave you a couple of examples before, so you have in your head what I mean by everyday work, and it being very practical, whatever your job is within the organization. And there's some really neat little techniques to help you to do this, and hopefully I can get them across to you today, either in a way to remind you of them because you already know them, you've forgotten, or introduce them to you for the first time. So if you look at that black thing in the middle, when we think about identifying value and finding the waste, this is how the best way, in my experience, to break it down. And you would see lots of this and lots of, you know, the big clever improvement technique stuff. And it's that idea of there being broadly three different types of activity that take place within any process. So some of that activity is value add, some of it is non-value add, and some of it is waste. And that diagram represents what you would typically see. So remember the fact I said on the last slide, there is always waste in every process. That actually in any service profile, process profile, about 60% of what you would find we could identify as waste. And I'll go through the definitions in a moment. 35% is what we would perceive as non-value add. And the bit that we really want to focus on and keep is that slither of the pie, you know, that 5% where it's considered to be value add activity. So let's come back around to the waste. So over there on the left hand side of the screen, I've given that definition of what we mean by waste within a process. And those are the activities, the processes, the time, the materials, the space, anything really that are not required by your organization or the customer wouldn't be willing to pay for it. Now, I think in our space, who pays is a really interesting dynamic to factor into this, because of course the recipients of your service in employment support is not the paying customer, but they are absolutely the customer, whereas we have a paymaster in the funders. So you're navigating those people with those different hats. So I deliberately leave those words in because they are as important to us, even though it demonstrates some of that complexity that we're navigating. But fundamentally, waste is about, are we doing stuff that is not of help to the customer? It's not help moving the customer to where they want it to be, and by virtue of the funder also being here, it's not therefore getting them the service that they want from us and that what they are paying us for. So when we think about that type of waste, we just need to get rid of it. So our drive should always be about elimination. How do we remove that waste from our process? If we go down to the bottom one, and you can see in brackets that important piece around it's essential, but it's non-value add. So these are the activities where they are needed, but they don't contribute any value to the product or service or the customer requirements. And regulatory requirements are a really good example of that. They might not contribute directly to us moving to where we want to get to, but they are essential. So they are non-value to the customer in that sense, but they are essential that we keep them because they'll cause us some other issues. So wherever possible, we want to reduce those activities, but we're not trying to eliminate them, because then that would cause us a different challenge. It's sometimes, and the reason the essentials in brackets is we create non-value add activity that isn't regulatory and isn't really essential either, but we've just done it for that long. So that person who had your job before you, they do a handover with you and you take on board what they used to do, and they took on board what the person before used to do. And actually what we haven't given ourselves is the headspace to be curious and say, I don't know why we're doing that. So it's non-value add. We may then move it into the waste bucket, or we may recognize it that we just need to reduce it rather than eliminate it. And of course, the last one, the one that's up there in green, is around value add. So these are the activities that take us, and that might be materials or information, or converts or transforms one thing into another thing in a way that meets the customer's needs. And again, we're back in that space of navigating sometimes the challenge you guys have to deal with, which is the conflict sometimes between what the customer wants and what the funder wants from a regulatory point of view. So that's what you're navigating, but it still applies. Any activity that takes material or information, converts or transforms them in a way that meets the customer's needs is value add. The customer, in inverted commas, is willing to pay for the activity. That it moves the product or service towards completion, or it allows us to do something right first time. And it can be all three, some of those or one of those, but that's what puts it into the value add space. It reminded me when I said that first one that someone once asked me a really great question, and it made me really think about the service, the amount of things we do that we don't charge for. And it's having in mind that if someone had paid for that service, would they have done? Have we done enough? Have we added value to them in a way that if they had been asked to put their hand in their pocket, even just by 50 pence, would they have done it? And it's a really neat way, I think, of thinking of, value add. And whilst at times some of our customers that we deal with in employment support may not want to be on that journey, certainly didn't choose to be on that journey, for many people are finding it really difficult to navigate it. How can we keep adding value to them in a way that moves them forward, even if it's not in this context, based on payment? So those are our three: value add, non-value add, and waste. And what I want to show you is a really easy way and a simple way, and actually quite an enjoyable way of finding out which of those things exist within any of your processes. And then I'll give you some examples. So this is Tim Wood. Sometimes now actually it's got another S on the end. So it's the 8 wastes, which are Tim Woods. And I'll tell you what the S stands for in a short while. If any of you know what it stands for, then please drop it in the chat. And it's a really simple way, without getting overly bogged down in some of the more complex but important statistical techniques of business improvement, to help you to think about what's in front of you and put some structure behind your curiosity, if you like. So the first one is transport waste, which is really interesting, bearing in mind the climate that we are in at the moment. Transport waste is designed as unnecessary movement of people or materials, and that might be hand delivering information, getting in a car, getting on a train. Helen and I were just having a conversation about this, moving things between different locations, transport between campuses, for example, if you happen to work in a school or university, or transport between your offices even. And oh my gosh, I suspect that we might have answered that one differently 3 years ago? How much of our roles have we now got to the point of saying, actually, is that transportation necessary for me to still add value, or is it wasteful to the process? So it is not contributing to moving the customer forward in the process towards employment. And I think that is a gorgeous one to have some fun with at the moment, in really thinking that through. The second one is inventory. So it might be that there are queues or excess material. So think about even a virtual inventory. So how big your email inbox is, and does that detract from you kind of knowing where your priorities are? It's work waiting to be processed. So you're waiting for someone else to do something, and that's linked later on with some of the others. There are queues or customers waiting to be served in the truest sense of it. It might be that there's excessive office supplies or promotional materials. I always give the example that Sally's on today from our team, and this will make her laugh because we've been through this a million times, where if you're in charge of ordering, collateral, so leaflets, brochures, whatever, when you go to order them, it'll say, well, if you order 200, then 200 is less per item than it is to order 50. So you think, okay, well, we'll order that. But of course, what that does is it creates a waste, because you're then left with that box sitting under your desk. And before you know it, one box becomes 5 boxes and so on. And then if everyone's doing the same thing, we've got even more of that going on. So inventory is about stuff. Have we got stuff, like I have a big pile of paper over here to my left, that's in our way and stopping us from being efficient, so therefore it becomes wasteful? The next one down is motion. So motion is about, and I'll give you an example of this later on, excessive movement of workers. So that's about the way that we might move around an office. It might be we've got to navigate, different floors. It might be that your customers have to get to you through different ways, and the lift is sometimes broke, or the doors don't work, or they can't find the floor, depending on where your office is located. So it's thinking about the movement of things. And again, motion can operate in a virtual way as well. And again, I'll give an example that Sally and I create for ourselves, but also then bitch about. And it can be where we put things in teams. So shared drives is the example on here, whether or not we've got too many Teams channels, whether or not the title is clear, and how much time that weighs. So motion, like inventory, is both virtual and actual. Waiting links with inventory, I mentioned before, but also on its own. So you're waiting, or you are in some way delayed from moving the customer to the next step, because you are waiting for other people to reply, other people to approve, people to add signatures, not being on time for meetings. So you're waiting for people to turn up, waiting for systems to respond because they're too slow. I imagine that I could give you 15 minutes on your own and come back at the end of this, and you would have a list as long as your arm of things that would sit within that waiting space. So it can be quite cathartic just to go through the exercise. Overproduction, doing more than is needed. So the example there is requesting or recording more information than is required, extra reports or information which aren't read, printing too many copies, hitting my absolute bugbear, hitting reply all on emails when actually the other people don't really need to know it. So the overproduction, I think, is very pertinent to a heavily data-driven sector where you guys have got data all over the place. So what you might find is, as one manager asks for certain information in this format, so let's say on an Excel spreadsheet, and someone else wants the same information, but they don't like it in that way, they prefer it on Word. So you have yourself a wasteful activity because it's not contributing to moving the customer forward. Over-processing is different but similar, so duplication of information and tasks as well, and then being in different places. In fact, that's probably a better example for this one, it being in different places and systems. You've got it on the shared drive, you've got it in Teams, you've got it on your local drive, and the biggie under over-processing is double checking. So I can't even begin to tell you how many times we have saved money in companies over the years from working out how many people check a signature, how many people are really looking at the same information over and over and over again. I know that you have lots of that as well. And the last D around that is defects. So any kind of work that has to be redone or can't be processed straight away because your piece of kit in some way doesn't work, whatever that piece of kit might happen to be. And the S, if you happen to want to play the Woods game, if rather than just the Tim Wood. The S is also about skills. So that can be you having a waste because someone is overskilled for a role that they're doing, or they're underskilled because they haven't been given the right level of training to be able to support them to do the job effectively. And again, I think that's probably a contextual one that some of you guys are living and breathing at the moment, because you're having to recruit staff in some cases very quickly in order to hit the deadlines and expectations of the contract, restart, for example. But actually what that creates is a bottleneck of having to get people through induction training, having to get people up to the right level of skill and understanding a very complex role in a very short space of time. So that in itself starts to create the other wastes within the system, as well as potential waste of re-recruitment and so on. So let me just pause there very briefly. And Helen's put one in the chat around reply all. It is the bane of my life, Helen. And don't be shy. Just pick out one of the Tim Woods. And out of those, the one that comes straight to the top of your head of saying, I know that that's a waste. And like I said, it could be something like I gave you a personal example of something in the way you're working, or it could be something that's much bigger than that, an organizational waste that could be resolved and would have more value add if we eliminated that waste or reduced that waste from the process. So let me get you to just drop your thoughts in the chat around that. And as I said, use it as an opportunity to, let's call it counselling. A chance just to say the stuff that perhaps isn't quite where you'd want it to be. Over processing things, so waiting for others to check or approve documents, absolutely, especially when they're not online, right? So when we're navigating sometimes some quite paper heavy processes, that's a problem. But also when we're waiting for it to happen online, it's great. Yeah, say one again. I thought you might all have a field day with that one. Keep going. Any others? Let's add some more in. It's quite nice everyone's seeing each other's, because then you realize it's not just you, that it's driving you nuts. Over processing, reporting the same information in different ways to different people who sit next to each other. It happens so often, doesn't it? Multiple places for things being recorded, absolutely. Document duplication, same document needs to be saved in multiple locations on the same document. It's interesting, Sally and I are going through with our own software at the moment, thinking about how we help to reduce that, because what we're worried about is we don't want to be part of that same issue. We're trying to resolve it for people. So thank you, everyone. Please feel free to keep adding those in and sharing them with each other on the call today. So let me just move you on a little bit more. And this is another way to look at it. So the same theme around, how do we think about value, non-value add, value and non-value add waste in a process. And it's a different way of looking at it. This is a reference from John Seddon's Freedom of Command and Control, which is about value versus failure demand. So you can kind of put things into two different boxes. So which are the things that we are doing that is driven by value? So it's demanded in order to make the service valuable. And which are the things that are being driven in order to deal with failure within the process? So value demand, what the service exists to provide and what the customer really wants. And again, I appreciate that even in that, you've sometimes got two different things going on. What the service provides and what the customer wants, not necessarily the same thing. And we've got to navigate that, because that's exactly how we start to think through some of these issues that we want to deal with in order to drive quality within the sector. So it comes from that space. What is it that the service is designed to provide? It links with your values and everything that you guys are trying to achieve. What are we here to do? What is it that we need to get to? And sometimes if you're just thinking about it from a customer point of view, and again, I'm trying to make it really practical, that can be as simple as coming from an ask from a customer, please, could you help me with my CV? I would like to do some training in software design. So it's coming from a place of this is something that would help me. It's adding value to the customer. The only caveat from that is if they have to ask, please, could you, or I would like more than once, it moves over into a wasteful activity. Whenever anyone, I come from a contact centre background, so I used to manage contact centres for British Airways and Orange in my day. And one of our single biggest metrics for anyone else who's gone through Contact Centre Lounge, you'll know, is right first time. So if someone has to call us back or contact us more than once, then what would have been a value question becomes a failure question. And people can see value actually even when they're complaining, as long as you deal with it the first time, because that then becomes, I want you to deal with this and you've dealt with it. But if they have to ask more than once, it's then the exact opposite. Failure demand is really interesting because it brings the question from a different space. And again, I thought you might like this because I thought you could probably see your own customers and your own staff actually in it. So the demand on your time or the demand for the service is being caused by the failure to do something or do something right for the customer. So the type of language you might hear in this space is, I don't understand. What is the status of? So the waiting one, you can see the words in that one there. The top one could be skills related, for example. I spoke to you earlier, but it's still not resolved. So that's where our issue crosses over. Please, can you check I've done this correctly? And X is not working. So we've got a defect waste that's coming in there. And I thought you might quite like this, although you'll get the webinar, you may want to even take a picture of this slide and maybe that one as well, or I'll send you them both anyway, because I think you could add lots of other things to this list. And my belief, remember what I said earlier about business improvement is cultural. This is not about someone in the job title, continuous improvement manager, coordinator, doing this stuff. This is just about how do we encourage these conversations within our teams so that we know that these are the type of questions we're always asking and being curious. So that's what I mean about today being about practical application, not necessarily just someone's job because it's in their title to do it. So I think you could add a million and more things to this, but hopefully it gives you a starting point. So if that's the way we identify waste, or some simple ways hopefully to do it. So we know what waste is. We know that it's when we are moving into the waste space of elimination, non-value add, we're trying to reduce it, recognizing some needs to stay, and then really focusing on driving the value add activity. We've had a quick look at Tim Woods and how a simple way of thinking about waste, and thank you for everyone who keeps dropping stuff in the chat as well. And also, we then moved on to say, so how does that look in terms of value or failure demand? So a slightly different way of looking at the same thing. So if that's how we identify it, this is some really simple stuff about how you can therefore do something with it, because the worst thing that can happen here is you're like, oh my God, everything's a nightmare. There's so much waste. And you start to scattergun and you try to fix everything. And actually the key to successful business improvement in my experience is focusing on one thing at a time and not getting yourself in the mode of trying to fix everything, but going, which is the thing that actually we could do? It might be because it's quick, it might be because it's having the most impact, it might be both of those, it might be because it doesn't cost any money. There's lots of reasons why you might prioritize, but I just want to show you some ideas behind that. So this is an example of the simplest way ever to go about finding waste in a process without getting over technical about it. And of course, you can use post-it note type things online as well as offline, but I've shown you an example of a couple of offline ones. And the examples I've given you are from my wonderful colleague, Hilary. So she is or was, because she's now moved to Durham University, my partner in crime at Newcastle University. Hilary and I have run business improvement projects for the uni for years and years and years, and she very kindly shared some of the examples on here. So flip charts on a wall or blank screen on your computer if you're doing it online, and virtual or real post-it notes. Don't overthink it, don't try to fix it. So that's the key. People go into solution mode too quickly. Do what you've started to do with me in the chat today. Just call out the problem without going into the trying to fix it mode. And you can see here that there's an example of over processing. So printing emails out. Does anyone still do that? People still do that. Manually collecting statistics, how managing leave requests came from one of the managers, duplication of calendars, checking registration forms. So lots of examples of the things you've said, but just slightly different words. And then over on the motion side, different software platforms, searching team folders is a nightmare. So some of the things that we've already touched on. And of course, what will then happen is you can then group them. So you can, my advice would be actually slightly different to the way they've done it on this one, is keep them all the same color. So you're over processing, use one color. Post-it note, motion, do the same, and try and keep the colors separately, because then you can visualize very clearly the ones that overlap, because you'll start to see connections between the same thing as mentioned on over processing, that's mentioned on motion, that's mentioned on waste, and then you can start to group them. And what that then allows you to do is it builds up your pile of prioritization, and it helps you to say, actually, we can't tackle all of these, but if we just do one of them, then that will have a really positive impact on the way that I am using my time. So I just wanted to share that with you. So don't feel like you need to go all high tech on it if you don't want to. You use A4 sheets and post-it notes, and the key is ultimately you'll get to the same outcome. Fundamentally, this is, when it's at its best, is a team-based activity. It's not just something you're doing on your own. You're thinking about it collectively and building your plan collectively. The other thing I would say is always take photos. If you do it offline, take photos like these ones. And sometimes people have them all around the walls and they leave them there if they have space, but there's always a record for people to come back to. Visualize the work. So if you remember the one we've just had, we came up with some things and we said these are a problem. So we're then moving them into a kind of Kanban board scenario, which is these are the things that we need to do. And you can see there the grouping has started in the colors. These are the bottlenecks. So the bottleneck is that this is the thing that might stop us being able to do it, or these are the bottlenecks it is creating for the customer. And then when it's in progress, it only moves over to that one on the right when you have said, okay, we are now ready to do something about it. So my advice to you is wherever you can, you should never have more than one thing on the right-hand side. If you've got a bigger team or a bit more capacity, you might have 2 or 3, but don't go any more than that, because then your in progress becomes your to-do list. And the danger that we have with time management is we never stop having a to-do list. Sally and I talk about this with people all the time with quality improvement planning and quality action planning, making sure that you focus on less things at the same time and it not being that big to-do list. So think about how you visualize, not just, I'll go back one, visualize the issues that have come out of your 8 or 7 or 8 waste exercise, but also visualize on this one how you're then taking it forward to do something about it. And I said I'd give you another example of visualizing the work. And this is a really, really simple way of visualizing motion waste around an office. And you can do the same with online, because some of you have talked about that as well, you know, moving things between different folders, and then that results in over processing and so on. And then it results in waiting because someone's waiting for you online to get something to them because you can't find it because you put it in the wrong folder. So visualize the work. So this is an example of different people moving around in office space. Now, I'm not suggesting here that you don't want people to move. I think that's actually been one of the disadvantages from a health and well-being point of view of us all working from home quite so much. But it is about getting the balance of that right. So if that motion is causing, let's use an extreme example actually. So you have a lot of clients who work for you who have special educational needs or disabilities. And actually, when you're thinking about potential motion waste, that may well be about the way that an office is laid out, that is a customer facing space, and how hard it is for them to navigate between desks and chairs and getting up and down stairs and lifts and all of that kind of stuff. So it's a really helpful and positive way of engaging with something that can be a real issue and working out what you might want to do about it. And if the time spent moving around is more valuable than the time not, when we keep our eye on where the value add needs to be in what we're doing. And the last one I'll show you, we have a version of this for any of you. I'm not sure if any of you on today who use our software platform in the Enquire module, and it would allow you to use a form of a tally card. So this is really helpful, and I'll show you an example of this to kind of close off in a moment today. It is where you've got perhaps a form, an online form or an offline form being completed, and what you're trying to do is work out where the mistakes are within it. So really simple stuff. What date did I look at the form? What form was I looking at? Was it completed accurately and correctly, and therefore could I process it, yes or no? And if you couldn't, then what was wrong? You know, where was the missing or inaccurate information? And just getting down to that level of granularity can be enormously powerful, particularly if you're trying to get business cases through more senior managers to think about more CPD for staff, a better IT system, more fail safes built in that stops people putting the wrong stuff in boxes. So, you know, don't lose sight of, again, the simplicity around how you might use something like this in practice. So final thing for me was I said I'd show you some more examples, because small change adds up. Don't try and, you know, eat the elephant, because you can't. So you remember that one lonely post-it note on our Kanban board just before that I was showing you. So here's a few techniques and some examples. Simple changes make a big impact. This again is an example from my colleagues at Newcastle Uni, where they wanted to eliminate failure demand created by paper forms and moving it to an online form. And what they were finding, because they had done this with their tally card, they had identified that there were issues with people not being able to read things, write things, things were written incorrectly or incomplete. Massive amount of time spent then querying that, so we've got over processing, and ultimately reducing the lead time that was impacting, in this case, on the students. So, you know, really obvious stuff like making sure that the language of the form is really simple to understand, putting things in place where you can't get past a particular field unless you filled it in. They're not big and clever things, they're obvious stuff. But when we're steeped in the day-to-day of not having that, we stop noticing the issues, and because we know how to do it, we just get past the issue. And the curiosity comes with always thinking about it from your customer or from your own staff or your colleagues' perspective. If they were brand new, would they know to do that? And it's a really good fail-safe of stopping you from not getting under the skin of the things that you need to. An example of time saving, so I just wanted to share with you the business case. So we did a piece of work with Newcastle. It was about eliminating double checking in one process that Hilary led on. They found out there were 2 people checking exactly the same thing. I imagine some of you have a wry smile at the moment because you're thinking we have about 9. You know? And again, that's because when there's a regulator involved, what happens is regulator changes the process. Everyone's a bit nervous about changing the internal process because they know the auditors haven't really forgotten the last process. So you keep the old audit in and then you put the new one over the top, and that's it. And then on and on we go. So in this case, 2 people checking the same thing. It didn't in any way improve the quality. So that's the key. It resulted in 2 hours saved per week, 98 hours per year, almost 3 working weeks. Imagine how many of those that we've got that we can spend the time with, and actually the motivation for your teams in their voice being heard or your customer's voice being heard, that you are taking these things and saying, okay, let's just, you know, do something about them. And some of them you can do within your own area, and some of them require cross-departmental support and working, and that's when, yeah, we get into really big exciting business improvement stuff. But you know, don't think that you sometimes I think we feel a bit helpless and we think, oh, I can't do anything about this because it needs more people. Look for the stuff you can do something about, and then influence with the things that you can't, once you've started to chip away at everything that's happening in your house, if you like. And using visual management, I'll show you an example of this for quality improvement actions. So instead of using Word documents just to capture all of the actions that come out of different reviews or meetings, has saved 1 hour, and in some cases 1 week saved in meeting time across the year. The time taken to close off actions improved by an average of 31 days, and there was less time spent recording actions, chasing completion, and updating spreadsheets. And it would obviously be remiss of me not to point out in a moment, you know, what we do and why we do it and how it helps. But I think, you know, if I could give you a kind of headline, it would be engagement is key to lasting improvement. Those bits we've talked about today, sticky improvement comes from what is the problem that we want to solve? What's really underpinning the current approach that's resulting in that problem? how do we openly consider current versus proposed approach, and then how do we go about implementing, monitoring it and reviewing it along the way. So a couple of closing slides from me, which I'll give you because we don't have any questions coming in yet, but you might have some at the end. So moving forward, here's a process for improvement. So it sums up what I've just said to you. Find the existing opportunities to capture the waste. Don't try and fix them. Just capture them, get them all down. Use the 7 or 8 ways to prompt discussion. Capture the outputs using the visual management techniques that we've shared today. Explore the wastes one at a time. So remember the right-hand side of the Kanban board, and move the opportunities over to that space as they're moving before you start on another one. You know, don't try and do too many things at once. And the final one, capture and share your activities and your impact. So think about how you use your self-assessment and quality improvement planning cycle to embed this process in the norm. And of course, that running thread being about involving staff and customers in the process, but without the S on the end for some reason that seems to have vanished. For those of you guys who use our software, where this fits in with ours, if you would like to know, if you happen not to use it, is in the Inquire module. So we have lots of things in there to support you with that, and particularly the action plans and how that moves into kind of the self-assessment and improvement planning cycle. If you happen to already have Inquire and you haven't downloaded the template, then there is a template on there which is called Finding Waste in Everyday Activity, and then it takes you through that list of questions and allows you to build up those action plans. So if you've got Inquire and you haven't downloaded it, just give us a yell and we'll let you know how to do it as well. And I suspect that's probably everything that you will want to hear from me today. So Helen, let me just pass over back to you.
Hello, thanks for that. And I was reflecting as you were doing those final slides, and I think for me the things that's so challenging is when you're looking at where the waste is to not try and fix it straight away. That as soon as I identify one, I'm lost in trying to fix it rather than going to so for me, I think that will be my takeaway, is to really structured on looking at all of the Timwoods before moving.
Yes, absolutely.
Doing anything with it, definitely.
Absolutely, it's the nature of the beast, is that we're led to moving into solutions mode really quickly, and what happens then is we put plasters over things. So instead of really getting under, you know, some of you will know the really simple 5 why stuff. So why we'll keep asking why is it happening, and eventually the bit that really hurts your head is the bit that you should fix. Whereas instead what we tend to do is stay at the first why and think, oh well, we'll just do that, you know, we'll change the wording on the box, instead of really getting under the skin of what's going on and how it looks. So yeah, stay out of solution mode, and for as long as you can, stay in investigation.
The danger is you never identify some of the real waste because you run out of time, and
that's right.
Go back to something else.
Where it becomes really innovative. So I'll give you an example actually from my time working in the airline industry, which I just think is just one of the most stunningly simple innovations that for years we were told couldn't happen because of regulation. And that's why sometimes you've got to challenge you have to challenge your own organization's interpretation of the regulation, and sometimes you have to challenge the regulation, you know, and that's where big policy change stuff happens, you know, and I know IEP play a really key role in that as well. Thank you, Rita. Thank you, Joanna. And it's about just making sure that you don't lose sight of sometimes the big innovation. For the airline industry, it was moving to online check-in. That you just, for years, they said, you can't do that. It's not possible. We need the person in front of us. We need to make this work in this particular way. You can't drop bags in that way. And that move, which was driven by EasyJet coming into the market, because EasyJet couldn't afford it. So, but their innovation was driven from the point of view of saying, well, we can't afford to do what British Airways have 3 million staff to do. So that creates innovation. So there's some fantastic examples to look for out of the sector as well.
Excellent, thank you. Well, we've got lots of people who've said thank you, and Aylesworth, I hope I pronounced it right, said really simple but really useful, and I think that's key, isn't it? When things are simple and we can use them, we will go and use them. When it's too complicated, we give up. So I echo that. Janet says really useful, clear explanations. Will you be sending out the presentation? We don't generally send out the presentation.
It's fine.
generally do is we generally share the recording via the YouTube channel. So you will have access to it as soon as I can get that uploaded.
Helen, I'll send those key slides over.
Perfect.
As
yes,
well.
if
So
you
it's
can
not a
do
problem.
that, and then we
Yeah,
can share those.
Yeah, not a problem.
Perfect. Thank you, Louise. Oh, and I got the pronunciation right. Excellent. It's a good day, and the sun's come back out. I got a bit overcast, and the sun's come out at the right time. So, thank you everyone for today. Thank you, Lou, for what is always a really interested in engaging session. And I think during the Digital Technology Conference, you were made to promise to come back soon and do another session for us. So you've kept a promise from as well. There you go. Thanks everyone for spending your lunch with us today. Next week we are joined by Society Matters, and the topic next week is, can you really combine care and work? We're going to be looking at the realities and complexities of balancing caring with work. So it's going to be another really interesting session. I hope to see you all at that. Oh, I say I hope to see you all at that session. I won't be at that session for a change. It will be my colleague Emma Williams who will be taking you through that session. So I hope to see you all in 2 weeks' time. Have a wonderful week, everyone. And thank you again for joining us at the Live Learn Lunch.